If you were to go out on the street and poll 100 random people asking them which book they think best reflects our current society, it'd be a fair bet that the majority of answers would be, of course, 1984. I'm willing to bet that most of you have probably read George Orwell's most famous novel, which was published in 1949 and has, over the decades since then, become part of our cultural consciousness. These days, with concerns like constant surveillance and larger government control, it does feel very relevant. And we have 1984 to thank for terms like Big Brother and even thought police. And let's not forget the adjective Orwellian. There is some speculation that George Orwell chose to name his novel in homage to another novel, one written almost half a century earlier by one of his favorite writers. If that's true, then we owe the existence of 1984 in part to that very book, one that, despite its incredibly prophetic observations, has since been largely forgotten. That book is G.K. Chesterton's The Napoleon of Notting Hill, which was written in 1904. The 20th century seems like it was the era of pessimism, the age when intelligent people looked out and saw that things were probably done progressing and were now going to get pretty bad. And with the dawn of industrialism, the rise of the corporation, the triumph of communism, and not one but two world wars, it's kind of hard to argue. People were churning out dystopian visions of the future left and right. Even Lovecraft could be said to have dipped into that a bit, albeit in a more fantastical vein. Sometime before the publication of 1984, Aldous Huxley had released his prophetic vision of the future, 1932's Brave New World. And while Huxley's novel might be proving itself more accurate than Orwell's in 1984, at least more broadly accurate, both of them lack some of the most important observations that are present in The Napoleon of Notting Hill. In a sense, putting aside books about technological advancements like what you get from Gibson or even Philip K. Dick, these three books, 1984, Brave New World, and The Napoleon of Notting Hill, serve as the holy trinity of the 20th century's prophetic visions of the future. If you read one or two, you won't get the whole image. You really need all three. Side note, on the other side of entertainment, Idiocracy, The Matrix, and Minority Report are, in my opinion, the holy trinity of eerily accurate film visions of the future. 1984 and Brave New World both drop us in media res, in a sense. We are seeing their visions of the world as bad as they thought it could possibly get, starting right in the middle without really getting into how society got to those points. For those books, it isn't really important how we got there, but what there looks like. G.K. Chesterton, instead, took a pretty decent stab at how he imagined current civilization might reach the dystopian future, with something of an allegory about what that future might look like. What was more important to him was the attitude of people and of leaders that got us to the point where the 1984s and the Brave New Worlds and the Matrixes and the Minority Reports were even possible. Because of this, The Napoleon of Notting Hill feels particularly prophetic in some areas that I think are more interesting to discover on one's own, more prophetic to our times. Feel free to draw your own conclusions and discuss them amongst yourselves in the comments. So what is The Napoleon of Notting Hill? Well, the year is 1984. Yes, really. And England has entered kind of easygoing stagnation. Western civilization has become a somewhat nebulous idea that people merely loosely acknowledge. The same way you acknowledge the 8-hour workday or the 7-day week. What I mean by that is that people no longer really cared what Western civilization or even civilization even was, or what it meant, or what its roots were, or what it was supposed to be protecting or caring for or building. Like in Idiocracy, people didn't care enough to maintain society, culture, or civilization. So as each year marched on, whatever happened, whatever developed, whatever occurred, people just accepted it. They didn't really care one way or the other. With no aid or maintenance from any great minds or innovations or discoveries or anything at all of that kind, Western civilization was allowed by people to be largely abandoned. Various forces had chosen to prioritize other things like efficient bureaucracies or their own bank accounts over anything else. Things like religion and strong attachments to one's culture had long ago fallen out of fashion as outdated or even embarrassingly backwards. One of the most extraordinary observations made by Chesterton in the opening pages of his novel is that people had lost faith in revolutions. He pointed out that a revolution requires as its source or fuel a kind of faith, that is, a firm belief in something larger than oneself, something outside oneself, whatever that might be. The society of his 1984 no longer had any such beliefs. All religion and ideologies had been dismissed as anti-intellectual cults. Everything, even politics, no longer mattered or was seen to have any substance or value. Politicians were seen to be all idiots or liars or both, who could accomplish nothing but spending every hour of every day arguing about meaningless nonsense. So politics didn't really exist anymore. And gradually people stopped caring about any of it. And because they didn't care, they didn't bother to maintain anything. And they certainly didn't bother to invent or create anything. As such, mankind moved slowly. All matters had lost meaning, purpose, curiosity. Banality and stagnation were actual goals, and to exist outside this frame of mediocrity was to be insane or sick or otherwise too weird to be tolerated. Within all this, because everyone everywhere had gradually lost, as he said, all faith in revolutions, there was no longer any need for an army or a police force. No one believed in anything, so no one was going to take up arms for anything. And anyway, who cares? In Chesterton's view, there would be no law against originality, but rather people as a whole would come to shun it and actively eradicate it from their midst. The mob, so to speak, would police itself by and large. A small, gentle police force was charged with ensuring that all things remained proper and correct, and would sometimes have to take away a person who was behaving in a way that was deemed absurd or superstitious. They were more acceptable social behavior police rather than crime police, because the only real crime in this 1984 was behaving contrary to what was socially acceptable. Sound familiar? Superstition, in fact, is the primary evil of 1984 England, although no one really cares enough about much of anything to do anything too extreme about it if they happen to see it. Its general shunning by society is enough to make it rare. The fact that all people are equally mentally torpid means that outrage or indignation doesn't really happen, but also neither does superstition. Religion, obviously, has been done away with as a superstition, but so has the superstition of nationality. Reverencing one's own country is now deemed bad. I mean, obviously, because that's exactly the kind of crazy superstition that leads to pesky things like wars. Better to have no sense of nation than to risk a war, was the general thinking. The thing that rings particularly true about this is the idea that all of these things, religions, politics, pop star worship, sports team worship, environmentalism, all of it is a kind of ideology, a version of religion or faith, if you will. In a sense, there's some truth to the idea that all of these replacement ideologies are little more than superstitions. Most of them are completely hollow and meaningless and drive people to levels of fanaticism that genuinely damage civilization and culture. As Chesterton observed and then predicted, the loss of true forms of faith, real things to believe in, would result in replacement ideologies that would drive people to madness. Then the government would step in and do away with these superstitions. Rather than trying to move men's minds to true things, good things, things that are worth living for and dying for, all things that could animate a person had to be done away with. The bottom line here is that in Chesterton's 1984, all real, true belief had long ago been abolished as irrational, and then its empty, hollow replacements were done away with as a way of maintaining peace and order. The end goal being that people needed to have nothing left to animate them, to move them to action, because then they were potentially unpredictable and uncontrollable. So that was the state of things when the story begins. Superstitions were gone, and so people were calm, complacent, hollowed-out idiots who were easy to control. If Chesterton had been able to foresee the rise of SSRIs, he might have added a thing or two about that as well, let me just say. But, as you can imagine, among the ideologies or superstitions that future England got rid of was the idea of worshipping monarchies or aristocracies. But to the minds of the people of 1984, no superstition was worse than democracy. England is now what the characters refer to as a despotism. One character, a government official, observed that it used to be commonly believed that despotism was the decay of democracy. But, he argued, in reality, despotism is merely the final, highest form of democracy. A despotism is perfected democracy. So, the government of England is organized bizarrely, but perhaps this is no more bizarre than current reality. The principle on which this government is built is that all men are not equally intelligent, but rather they are all equally idiotic. They prefer direct leadership by one idiot rather than by a crowd of idiots arguing eternally and accomplishing nothing. This idiot, the King of England, is selected at random, like jury selection. And when it's your turn to be king, you go and do your duty quietly until you die. This king is, for the duration of his reign, a quiet, acceptable despot. He technically has a tremendous amount of authority, but remember, people had lost faith in revolution, so no king ever cared enough to do anything with that kind of authority anymore. So he just signed papers and put his rubber stamp wherever his underlings told him to, and they called it good. In a world where everyone is a complacent idiot, this system actually worked pretty well for several decades. Now, within the English government in 1984, there is a man named Oberon Quinn. This is not an ordinary idiot. He's strange enough and different enough that he disturbs his colleagues. He challenges them, but in a way that comes across insane rather than revolutionary. In a sense, in the early pages of the book, Quinn comes across like a troll or a jester, like his favorite pastime is messing with people. And so, of course, when our novel opens, it turns out that Mr. Oberon Quinn has been selected as the new King of England. Immediately upon learning of his new appointment, our unfazed new monarch alters nothing about his behavior. He continues his ridiculous ways, even perhaps getting more and more extreme now that no one has the power to stop him, not even the gentle, socially appropriate behavior police. He insists upon acts of comedy and absurdity in public. His goal, in fact, is to make all state functions a gigantic roaring joke. In his mind, he is the perfect form of his country's new philosophy. If religion and monarchy and even democracy should all be thrown off as reprehensible superstitions, then why in the world should he take his role as king seriously? Oberon's first act upon becoming king was to carry out what was basically a gigantic practical joke forced upon all of England. He issued a proclamation that all the individual neighborhoods and boroughs were to become municipalities, their own free city-states, so to speak. Each was to have its own city wall, its own armed guard, its own flags and banners. He himself would design all their uniforms and coats of arms. He declared that he wanted this done in an effort to maintain and restore the ancient traditions of England, which otherwise he feared would be forgotten. But instead of restoring the true old traditions and legends, he completely randomly made up new ones, entirely as a joke. He was aided in this by the fact that maintaining traditions and learning about one's history had, like all superstitions, fallen out of favor. There was no one left who remembered the old legends and history, so he could say whatever he wanted, and because he had conviction and authority, everyone believed him, and went along with it. Some of the other characters wondered if Oberon was insane. Was this all just a huge joke? Does he really believe in any of this? But think about that. What does that even mean, believe in it? This is England in 1984. No one believes in anything anymore. And everyone's an idiot who doesn't know anything about anything but their own private little selves. And no one cares about anything but their own private little selves. And no one believes in anything larger than themselves. Every person is his own little idiot god with his own main character creed. Why should the king be any different? In a sense, this aspect of the book reads like a Victorian take on idiocracy. Regardless, because he had absolute authority as the despot King of England, he had to be obeyed, and no one believed in any other way of life strongly enough to oppose him, so they just shrugged and went along with it. Yeah, some of them said it's stupid, but so what? Nothing has really changed. We can still go about our business, so who cares if we now have all these random idiot customs and these random idiot legends that we have to randomly honor like idiots? Who cares? So, for years, things went on exactly as he had ordered them to be. Like the king himself, the rulers or provosts of each of these city-states were chosen at random. These rulers were then required to be always escorted by guards and wear the uniforms the king had designed. In general, life carried on as usual, except now some random guy in each city had a retinue of guards traipsing around his front lawn and following him to the grocery store or whatever. And also, there were about 8 million miles more red tape and official protocols for every single government operation. And the king had his laughs, and the people didn't really care. Okay, so things start to get a little complicated with the matter of a road. The provosts of at least 3, maybe 4 boroughs had been working together to plan a road connecting their city-states for, industry or business purposes. So it was time to tear down some neighborhoods, as usual. The project had been ongoing for some 10 years. However, just as the real work was about to get underway, the old provost of Notting Hill died, and the new provost, chosen at random, was put into power, a young man by the name of Adam Wayne. Now, Our guy, Adam Wayne, provost of Notting Hill, had taken the king's charter of free cities very, very seriously. He had taken it as his holy sworn duty to protect his Notting Hill municipality. And so he was refusing to allow the provosts of the other cities to tear down one of his alleys, the soon-to-be legendary Pump Street, in order to build their road. Naturally, this was a problem. The king believed that Wayne must be in on the joke, another jester or troll, if you will, who shared his vision for a ridiculous, idiotic England, who enjoyed the madness of their shared lunacy in a world that had become stale with a kind of insane perversion of order. This is what our King Oberon assumed, that Provost Wayne of Notting Hill was just like him. But the Provost of Notting Hill was perhaps the first man in all of England, and certainly the first provost of the free cities, who took this whole thing seriously. He was quite literally ready to die rather than allow an alley of his city be torn down to make way for some random road. Inspired and animated by the king's renewal of legend, custom, honor, righteousness, even if it had all been a giant joke, he took all of that to heart. He wanted to make his corner of England, his Notting Hill, into a great and beautiful place for his people. He wanted it to be strong and full of heroism and light and deeply rooted culture. So in a way that was entirely organic, he began to make roots. He planted himself at Pump Street in his Notting Hill and refused to budge. And he rallied his people around him. How had this happened? How was it that in future England, where no one cared about anything and no one believed in anything, there managed to emerge a man who believed in something so strongly that he was on the cusp of changing the world? What happened? Chesterton leaves this up to the reader, offering only small hints as to how he thinks this could have come about. Basically, the issue was that mankind cannot survive in this way forever. Being emptied of beliefs and history and faith, as it were, is an unnatural state. The human mind and the human soul rebels against it. In Chesterton's story, a kind of cosmic alignment of the stars happened. Adam Wayne represented the mind hungry for meaning and purpose, and Oberon was the unserious jokester, the ruler who cared about nothing but his own pleasure, who happened to tell a joke that hit Adam Wayne just right to light the spark that had been extinguished in mankind. The void in Adam Wayne was instantly occupied by something that might very well have been a deep and genuine faith. Now, Adam Wayne, provost of Notting Hill, was quite an interesting guy. When in private with the king, our guy Oberon tried to, get him to give up the act, admit the joke, laugh at the absurdity of it all so everyone could go back to play acting for his amusement. But no, Wayne pointed out with some bitterness that there was no absurdity or comedy in the fact that he was willing to die or go to war for one alley in his free city. Kings could shed blood to expand their territory, grow their coffers, or even for the tax on lace, he said. But he couldn't shed blood for his people's homes, for an entire street of his city? Why was the latter absurd, but the former serious? Why was it a joke to defend one's home, but it wasn't a joke to tear down those homes in order to build some random highway? To the reader, the more Wayne talked, the more insane sense he made. Sure, he was a little childishly earnest, but that was precisely what had been drained from the world of 1984, the ability to take something seriously, the ability to care about something larger than oneself. This is where Chesterton gets a little deeper into things than Huxley or Orwell ever did. Sure, they both painted vivid futures in which things were really obviously tangibly horrific, but Chesterton instead digs under the skin. The future he foresaw, very accurately I might add, was one in which no one believed in anything anymore, and no one took anything seriously, and there was simply nothing real, nothing worthwhile. No man had any purpose, no child had any dreams. Everything was plain and ordinary and dull, and because of that, people were susceptible to anything. That was what King Oberon harnessed. Because the people of 1984 England didn't believe in anything except just going along with whatever was happening, he could play with them like dolls and they wouldn't do anything about it but politely complain once in a while. Had King Oberon been a truly evil tyrant, had he been Big Brother or one of Huxley's resident world controllers, it would have been effortless to usher in the world of those other dystopias. No one would have cared enough to stop him. And even if they had, their complacency had gradually made them defenseless, without the means to rise up and overthrow a tyrant even if they had wanted to. And they probably wouldn't have wanted to. They just went along with whatever. They didn't care. It just so happened that in this fictional timeline, a court jester was crowned king instead of an evil tyrant, and he happened to tell just the right joke to just the right man, so things zigged instead of zagged. Complacency and empty heads was the future Chesterton foresaw. Had he had half a clue about social media, he would have been even more sure, let me just say. Our modern society, courtesy of 100,000 different things, among them social media certainly, has replaced genuine belief in something with the aesthetics of ideology. People only really care about looking like they care about things. And even within that, it's more important to be funny or absurd or not quite serious enough to be uncomfortable. When was the last time people really cared about something in the world? If people really cared about social issues, then they would be living their lives according to what they say they believed, instead of spending all their time vegetating in front of Netflix while posting 100 characters or less about whatever social issue is currently trending in hopes of getting a bunch of validation that they don't even care about on issues that they don't even care about. And people like that, people who don't care, are really easy for politicians and businessmen to manipulate and control. The world is full of exactly the people Chesterton described in his vision of future England. People who are so complacent that they literally do nothing when an idiot is crowned king and starts forcing them to cosplay as a medieval kingdom. Yeah, they might write a strongly worded letter, but they still wear the stupid costumes, they still follow the stupid rules, they still pay the stupid taxes, and while they're doing it, they don't care any more or any less about anything. The complacency and meaninglessness of society is the absolutely essential and crucial ingredient that makes worlds like 1984 and Brave New World possible. Both of those books showed us what could happen. The Napoleon of Notting Hill wanted to speculate how we as human beings and members of society could let such things happen. Adam Wayne is the unforeseen wild card, the one man in 100,000 who does care. Is it because he's insane? Psychiatrist R.D. Laing said that it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. In reality, Wayne is the only real person, and certainly the only sane person, in all of England. Chesterton observed that as mankind marches on, as progress progresses interminably into whatever final form it aims to achieve, things invariably will not be added to civilization and society, but rather they are removed. Each step of modern progress strips away yet another layer of what had previously been precious and life-giving. And once a society and civilization had nothing left but the mere day-to-day practicalities of living, once there was nothing left and everything had been demolished, abolished, or forgotten, the soul of mankind would be a kind of void. And then humanity would be at the mercy of whoever decided to fill that void, whether in malice, as we so often see today, or in jest, which honestly probably happens just as often given the quality of modern politicians. And then society, civilization, and humanity will be little more than what they are made to be, artificially formed to be, idiot dolls in the hands of powerful idiots. The joke, if you can call it a joke, is that human beings actually can't live empty like that. They can't survive and they can't endure, not for long, with nothing to live for, nothing to animate them. Nature and the human soul abhors a vacuum. King Oberon woke up the soul of Adam Wayne with his big speeches about loving your homeland and fighting for what you believe in and planting deep, deep roots. King Oberon didn't believe a word of it. It was all a huge joke he was using to manipulate and mess with people. But Adam Wayne believed it. He believed it with his whole heart. He literally went to war with swords and armor to defend Pump Street from the businessmen who wanted to raise it to make room for their stupid road. And he won. Things got even crazier with the fervor of his true, genuine belief, his faith, you could say, animating others, even some of the businessmen. But the flip side of that was also true. Some of the businessmen did not believe, did not have faith. They clung to their stupid road and their businesses. Their ideological devotion to the death of superstition grew so strong and so maniacal that it became an ideological superstition, and they too were animated, but in a way that was villainous and even a little evil. And while Adam Wayne was able to rally his people's faith, the businessmen had to go and buy armies in an effort to crush the King of Notting Hill. To them, it wasn't just that he was preventing a road from being built. It was that his madness, as they believed it was dangerous. To them, the idea that anyone could believe like that in something as meaningless as his home or his people's homes, needed to be done away with. Anyone willing to stand in the way of progress, to stop the momentum of banality and complacency, was a dangerous villain. And so a war broke out, and King Oberon looked out at what he had accidentally wrought, and he felt that maybe, just maybe, Adam Wayne was the sane one, and he was the idiot. We as a society, as a civilization, have had everything stripped away one layer at a time. Old books are taken off the shelves, old writers are canceled, old causes are condemned, old wars are erased, old heroes are maligned, old ideas, old beliefs are waved aside as so much superstition. Beauty is replaced with banality. Wellness is replaced by medication. Religion is replaced by fanatical ideology and empty idol worship. And love is replaced by hollow validation. We have dangerously little to live by, little to live on, and nothing to nourish us, nothing to give us purpose and light. The soul, piece by piece, inch by inch, is being killed. And this is ideal for modern politicians and manipulative leaders, the would-be big brothers and world tyrants. An empty vessel can be animated by anything, even a stupid joke, or if you want, a malicious, manipulative psyop, because everyone craves animation. So we can have gender wars dumped into us. We can have the environment foisted upon us. We can have this conflict and that social issue and this and that. And the people animate like crazed animals with all this because all they want is animation. Very few people are lucky enough to have that animation trigger genuine faith. For most, it's like banal fanaticism, as you see in Brave New World in 1984, where most people believe strongly in things being the way they are and trusting progress. They'll defend the dystopia to their deaths because it animated their empty souls just enough, just as so often happens in real life, just as Morpheus observed in The Matrix.
These people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it.
Banality, numbness, the emptiness of modern society make any kind of cause, any kind of flicker of pleasure, or even artificial faith feel like the very hand of God. And so a lot of people naturally will chew off their own arms to defend it. Chesterton saw that. The result is the world we see today, the world that could very easily become the Brave New World or 1984 or some combination of the two, or perhaps some horror we can't even imagine. The reality in which we live in our times is Chesterton's 1984 as much as it is Orwell's. And in fact, Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World would not be possible without Chesterton's 1984. Chesterton foresaw a world in which people were so completely emptied of purpose, roots, traditions, and meaning that they could be filled with anything that the current despot decided to pour in. In Brave New World especially, people would not have allowed their hungers and desires and pleasures to become the very gods they allowed to destroy them had they not already been emptied of everything else. The void had to be filled. For Huxley, it was filled with pleasures, as we see everywhere today. For Orwell, it was filled with fear. The final battle for Notting Hill in Chesterton's book takes place sometime in the first quarter of the 21st century, sometime around 2020. Adam Wayne, now the Emperor of Notting Hill, older, wiser, but no less staunchly devoted to his people and his roots, makes his final stand against everyone who thinks he's insane, everyone who wants to uproot the newborn culture he has been nourishing and cultivating for decades after his victory at Pump Street, knowing that he probably won't survive because so many people still don't care enough to stand with him. It's not just that they think he's insane, but also that he's dangerous. But his idiot strength, his fool's power, is so immense that they have to destroy half of London to get rid of him. They have to tear out the entirety of England's new fragile root system in order to get him to budge. And as he falls, King Oberon understands that something very terrible is happening. Something very important is being destroyed. A really long time ago, I said something along the lines of, good literature is truer than history. It's truer than philosophy or sociology. Good literature can show us truth in a way we can actually understand. That's why I love good books, because they can be really important and they can help us find real wisdom. This one is no different. Human beings naturally turn to fiction to understand, interpret, and metabolize society and life. It's a shame that Napoleon of Notting Hill is out of print, because I think it has incredibly important pieces of wisdom couched within a story that is both delightfully absurd and deeply moving. And I think it possesses a crucial missing link between the world of the present and the dystopias that threaten our future. If you've stayed with me in auto here all the way to the end, then thank you very much. We all know I could talk about books forever. If you want to hear, or I guess read me talk about more books forever, I have several articles on my website on various books and other literary topics. There's also information there about joining my book club if you're interested. Link below. I hope everyone is having a lovely summer. Thank you again for watching to the end, and as always, I'll see you next time.